The water ran cold over Kade Emerson's calloused hands as he crouched beside the creek, his pan dipping rhythmically into the shallow current, while dawn broke over the Black Hills in shades of pink and gold. He had been working this claim for 3 months now, surviving on dried beef and hope, and in all that time he had found nothing but worthless sand and the occasional flash of fool's gold that mocked his dreams. But this morning, as the pan settled and the lighter sediment washed away, he saw it glinting in the bottom like captured sunlight, unmistakable and real. Gold. More gold than he had ever seen in one place, nuggets the size of his thumbnail mixed with flakes that danced in the water. His heart hammered against his ribs as he carefully transferred the precious metal into his leather pouch, his hands shaking with disbelief and something close to joy. He had done it. After years of wandering from Colorado to Montana, following rumors and failing claims, he had finally struck it rich. Kade sat back on his heels, the pouch heavy in his palm, and stared at it for a long moment. The weight of it represented everything he had worked for since he was 18 years old and left his family's failing farm in Kansas. He was 27 now, weathered by sun and hardship, and this gold could change everything. He could buy land, build a proper house, maybe even start that horse ranch he had always dreamed about. The possibilities stretched before him like the Dakota prairie, endless and bright. But as he stood and brushed the mud from his knees, preparing to head back to the camp where his bedroll and supplies waited, he noticed something that made him freeze. Smoke. Not the thin, wispy kind from a cooking fire, but thick black columns rising from the direction of Custer, the small town about 5 miles west where he bought his supplies and occasionally shared a drink with the other prospectors. Too much smoke, coming from too many places. His gut clenched with worry as he quickly gathered his pan and pouch, securing them in his saddlebags before mounting his bay mare, Copper. The ride into town took less than an hour at a hard gallop, and what he found when he arrived made his blood run cold. 3 buildings were burning, including the general store and the small boarding house where traveling merchants usually stayed. People ran through the streets with buckets, trying to control the flames, while others stood in shocked clusters, staring at the destruction. Kade dismounted and grabbed the first person he saw, a grizzled miner named Dutch who sometimes worked claims near his own. "What happened?" Kade demanded. Dutch's face was grim, soot-streaked and angry. "Raiders. Hit us about 2 hours ago, just before dawn. They burned what they could, stole what they wanted, and rode off before anyone could organize a defense. Sheriff took a bullet in the leg trying to stop them." Kade felt rage burn in his chest, hot and fierce. Custer was a peaceful town, settled in 1875 after the gold rush brought people flooding into the Black Hills. It was 1883 now, and the wild lawlessness that had characterized the early days was supposed to be behind them. The town had a sheriff, a church, civilized rules. But clearly, civilization was still a fragile thing out here. "Anyone killed?" he asked, dreading the answer. "No deaths, thank God, but plenty hurt, and the Zimmerman girl is missing." The name hit Kade like a physical blow. Penelope Zimmerman. Dutch nodded, his expression darkening further. "They took her. Her father's half mad with worry. He is organizing a posse now, but most of the men are either hurt or busy trying to save what is left of their property." Kade did not wait to hear more. He pushed through the crowd, leading Copper by the reins, until he found Marcus Zimmerman standing outside the burned shell of what had been his general store. The man looked like he had aged 10 years in the span of a morning, his face pale and drawn, his clothes covered in ash. When he saw Kade, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Emerson, thank God. You are a tracker, you know the hills better than anyone. Please, you have to help me find her." Kade had known the Zimmerman family since he first arrived in Custer. Marcus ran the general store with a firm but fair hand, always extending credit when times were tough, and never gouging prices the way some merchants did. His wife had died 2 years ago from pneumonia, leaving him to raise their daughter alone, Penelope. Kade had seen her around town countless times, though they had never spoken more than a few polite words. She was beautiful in a way that made men forget their own names, with honey-colored hair that fell in waves down her back and eyes the color of creek water in summer, that clear blue-green that seemed to hold light within it. She was 22, he knew, because the whole town had celebrated her birthday last month with a dance at the community hall. He also knew that she was kind, that she helped her father in the store and donated food to the families who were struggling, that she taught reading to the children on Sunday afternoons in the church. She was the sort of woman who made a place feel like home, the sort of woman men wrote songs and poems about. Kade had admired her from a distance, never thinking he had anything to offer someone like her. He was just a drifter with dirt under his fingernails and dreams that never quite came true. Until this morning. "I will find her," Kade said, and the certainty in his voice seemed to steady Marcus. "How many men can you spare?" "Just 2, Jacob and Thomas. The rest are needed here." Kade nodded. 2 men would have to be enough. Get them provisioned and mounted. "I need to check the tracks while they are still fresh." "Which direction did they go?" "Northeast, toward the Badlands." That made sense. The Badlands were a maze of ravines and rock formations, perfect for hiding. It would be dangerous to follow them there, but Kade did not care about danger. He cared about bringing Penelope home safely. Within 30 minutes, he was riding out of town with Jacob and Thomas flanking him, 3 grim-faced men on a mission. The tracks were easy to follow at first, a group of at least 8 horses heading at speed toward the broken terrain that marked the beginning of the Badlands. Kade studied the prints carefully, noting the different depths and patterns. Most of the horses were shod, but one set of tracks was lighter, the pattern unfamiliar. That would be Penelope's horse, or possibly Penelope herself if they had forced her onto one of their mounts. They rode hard through the morning, stopping occasionally so Kade could check the trail. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them with relentless heat, and the landscape gradually shifted from rolling grassland to the strange, almost otherworldly terrain of the Badlands. Towering spires of eroded rock rose around them, striped in layers of rust and cream and gray, and the air smelled of dust and ancient stone. "We are getting close," Kade said quietly, raising a hand to halt the others. "The tracks are fresher here. They stopped to rest not long ago." "How many of them?" Thomas asked. He was young, barely 20, with more enthusiasm than experience. 8, like we thought, all armed based on the way they sit their horses. These are not amateurs. Jacob, who was older and had fought in some of the Indian campaigns, frowned. "Could be the Dalton gang. They have been hitting settlements all through Wyoming and Montana for the past year. Heard they moved into Dakota territory last month." Kade had heard the same rumors. The Dalton gang was notorious, led by 3 brothers who had turned to crime after the war and built a reputation for violence and cunning. If they had Penelope, the situation was even more dangerous than he had thought. They continued more cautiously now, using the rock formations for cover, until they crested a ridge and looked down into a shallow valley. There, camped beside a dried-up creek bed, were the raiders. Kade counted quickly. 8 men, just as the tracks had indicated, and in the center of their camp, tied to a wooden post driven into the ground, was Penelope. Even from this distance, he could see that she was unharmed, though her dress was torn and her face was streaked with dust and tears. She sat with her back straight, her chin raised in defiance, and something about that posture, that refusal to break even in the face of terror, made Kade's chest tighten with admiration and rage. "We cannot take them head-on," Jacob whispered. 3 against 8 is suicide." "I know." Kade studied the camp layout, his mind racing. The raiders looked relaxed, confident. They had posted no guards, probably assuming no one would be foolish enough to follow them this deep into the Badlands. That arrogance might be their downfall. "We wait until dark. Then we go in quiet, cut her loose, and get out before they know what happened." "And if they wake up," Thomas asked, "then we fight. But it will not come to that if we are careful." The hours until nightfall felt endless. They retreated to a sheltered spot among the rocks and took turns watching the camp while the others tried to rest. Kade could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Penelope's face, imagined what she must be feeling. Fear, certainly, but also anger and confusion. Why her? Why had they taken her specifically? Raiders usually stole goods, not people. Unless they planned to ransom her back to her father, but that seemed unlikely. Marcus ran a successful store, but he was not wealthy enough to attract that kind of attention. As the sun set and shadows pooled in the valley, Kade checked his revolver and knife, making sure both were secure. He had never killed a man before, though he had come close a few times in bar fights and claim disputes. He wondered if he would be capable of it tonight if it came down to saving Penelope's life. He decided he would be. Some things were worth killing for. When full darkness fell, and the raiders had settled around their fire, passing a bottle of whiskey and telling crude jokes that carried up to where Kade and the others waited, they began their descent. Kade moved like a ghost, his boots finding purchase on the rocky slope without dislodging stones or making noise. Jacob and Thomas followed, equally silent. The plan was simple. Kade would cut Penelope free while Jacob and Thomas positioned themselves to cover their escape. If shooting started, they would have to rely on speed and surprise. The camp was about 50 yards across, with the fire in the center and the raiders arranged around it in various states of drunkenness. Penelope was tied on the far side, partially hidden by shadows. Kade approached from behind, using the darkness as cover, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. When he reached her, he knelt down and pressed a hand gently over her mouth before she could cry out. "Do not scream," he whispered directly into her ear. "I am here to help you. My name is Kade Emerson. Your father sent me." He felt her body go rigid with shock, then slowly relax as his words registered. When he removed his hand, she turned her head slightly to look at him, and even in the dim light he could see the relief flooding her eyes. "They took me from my bedroom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I woke up and one of them had his hand over my mouth. I tried to fight, but there were too many. I know. It is going to be all right. I am going to cut you loose now, but you have to stay quiet and move slowly. Can you do that?" She nodded, and he saw the determination in her expression, the same defiance she had shown sitting tied to that post. This was a woman who would not fall apart in a crisis. He used his knife to saw through the ropes binding her wrists, working as quickly as he dared. The fibers parted and she pulled her hands free, rubbing circulation back into them. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then let us go. Stay close to me and step where I step." They began moving back toward the ridge, Penelope following so closely he could feel her breath on his neck. They made it about 20 yards before one of the raiders stood up from the fire to relieve himself and happened to look in their direction. "Hey, she is getting away." The camp erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for their weapons, shouting and cursing. Kade grabbed Penelope's hand and ran, no longer worrying about noise, just focused on speed. Bullets whined past them, striking rocks and sending up sparks. Jacob and Thomas opened fire from their position, providing cover, and Kade heard one of the raiders cry out as he was hit. "Keep going." Kade shouted to Penelope. "Do not stop." She ran beside him, her skirts hiked up around her knees, her breath coming in gasps. They reached the slope and scrambled up, rocks sliding under their feet, the darkness both a blessing and a curse. Behind them, the raiders were mounting up, preparing to give chase. Kade knew they had to reach the horses and get a head start, or they would never make it back to Custer alive. Jacob and Thomas were already at the top of the ridge, holding the reins of the horses. Kade practically threw Penelope onto Copper, then swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her steady. They took off at a gallop, racing through the darkness with the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. The ride that followed was a nightmare of speed and terror. Kade knew these badlands better than most, but in the dark, every shadow could hide a ravine or a cliff. He guided Copper with his knees, trusting the mare's instincts, while Penelope clung to the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands. Shots rang out occasionally, but the raiders were firing blind, and none found their mark. After what felt like hours but was probably closer to 30 minutes, the sounds of pursuit faded. Kade did not slow down until they were well clear of the badlands and back on open prairie, where the moonlight turned the grass silver and he could see for miles in every direction. Only then did he allow Copper to drop to a trot, then a walk. "Are you hurt?" he asked Penelope, suddenly aware of how close they were, her back pressed against his chest, his arm still around her waist. "No, shaken but not hurt. You saved my life." Her voice was thick with emotion, and when she turned her head to look at him, he saw tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die out there, or worse. You are safe now. That is all that matters." Behind them, Jacob and Thomas caught up, both looking worse for wear but alive. Thomas had a graze on his shoulder, but it was not serious. They continued riding through the night, not stopping until the lights of Custer appeared on the horizon as dawn broke. The town erupted when they rode in. Marcus Zimmerman came running from the temporary shelter he had set up behind the church, his face transforming from despair to joy when he saw his daughter alive and whole. He pulled her down from the horse and hugged her so tightly Kade thought he might break her ribs, both of them crying and talking over each other. "Thank you," Marcus said to Kade when he finally released Penelope. "You brought her back. I do not know how to repay you." "No payment necessary," Kade said, though exhaustion was catching up with him now, making his limbs heavy and his thoughts slow. "I am just glad she is safe." But as he turned to lead Copper to the livery, Penelope stepped forward and caught his arm. "Wait, I need to thank you properly." "Will you let me?" He looked down at her, this woman he had admired from afar, and saw something in her eyes he had not expected. Gratitude, yes, but also curiosity and warmth. "You do not owe me anything. Maybe not, but I would like to see you again. Would you come to dinner once things have settled? Once my father has rebuilt the store." Kade hesitated, acutely aware of the gold still in his saddlebags, the fortune that could change his life. He could leave Custer now, go anywhere, buy anything. But looking at Penelope, at the hope and interest in her expression, he found he did not want to go anywhere, not yet. "I would like that," he said softly. She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Then it is settled. Come by in 3 days. I will cook something special." Over the next weeks, Custer slowly rebuilt. The burned buildings were cleared away and new lumber brought in from Deadwood. Kade helped with the construction, using his gold to quietly purchase supplies and donate them to families who had lost everything. He did not tell anyone about his strike, keeping the nuggets and flakes hidden in his camp. but he made sure the rebuilding went faster than it would have otherwise. And 3 days after the rescue, as promised, he rode into town and knocked on the door of the small house behind where the general store was being reconstructed. Penelope answered, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair pinned up in a way that showed the graceful curve of her neck. She smiled when she saw him, and Kade felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "You came." "I said I would. I know. But I was not sure if you meant it. Come in, please." The house was modest but comfortable, with handmade furniture and curtains at the windows. Marcus was there, shaking Kade's hand with genuine warmth, and they sat down to a meal of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden behind the house. The conversation flowed easily, and Kade found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around other people. Penelope asked him about prospecting, about the life he had led before coming to Custer, and he told her stories about Colorado and Montana, about the men he had known and the places he had seen. "It sounds lonely," she said thoughtfully, refilling his coffee cup. "It is," Kade admitted. "But I always figured that was the price of freedom. No roots, no obligations, just the next claim, the next opportunity. And now that you have found gold," he looked at her sharply, wondering how she knew, but her expression was innocent, merely curious. "What makes you think I found gold?" "The way you have been helping with supplies. The lumber and nails do not appear out of nowhere, Mr. Emerson. And I have seen you talking to the assayer. It is not hard to put the pieces together." Kade glanced at Marcus, who was carefully studying his plate with a slight smile. He had been found out, but neither of them seemed angry about it. "I found some," he acknowledged carefully, "enough to make a difference. Enough to leave if you wanted to," Penelope said quietly. "Yes, but you are still here." "I am." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her eyes, a recognition of unspoken possibility. "I am glad." After dinner, Marcus excused himself to work on inventory lists, leaving Kade and Penelope alone on the porch. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of prairie grass and distant pine. Kade stood with his hands in his pockets, unsure of what to say, while Penelope leaned against the railing and looked up at the stars. "I was terrified that night," she said suddenly, "when they took me. I kept thinking about everything I had never done, everything I had never said, all the safe choices I had made because I was afraid of taking risks. You are not a coward, Penelope. The way you handled yourself out there, that took courage. Maybe it was just stubbornness. My mother always said I was too stubborn for my own good." She smiled sadly at the memory. "I miss her. She would have liked you, I think. She always said I should find someone who knew how to work hard and treat people with kindness. I am not sure I am that person. I think you are. You risked your life for someone you barely knew. That speaks to character." Kade did not know how to respond to that, so he just stood there, feeling the weight of her words. After a moment, Penelope pushed away from the railing and came to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. "I would like to see you again," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Not to thank you, just because I want to, if you want that too." "I do," Kade said, and realized it was the absolute truth. "I really do." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and small in his calloused palm. "Then we will see where this goes." Over the following weeks, Kade and Penelope saw each other often. He would ride into town after working his claim, and they would walk together through the rebuilding streets, talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved reading, that her favorite book was Jane Eyre, that she had always dreamed of seeing the ocean even though she knew it was unlikely. She learned that he had a gift for woodworking, that he played the harmonica though he was too shy to perform in public, that he had a deep fear of being trapped in one place, but an equally deep longing for somewhere to belong. "Those two things do not have to be opposites," she told him one evening as they sat by the creek where he had found his gold. "Belonging does not mean being trapped. It means choosing to stay because you want to, not because you have to." "Is that what you do? Choose to stay in Custer?" "Every day I could leave. I have cousins in Chicago who have invited me to come live with them to experience city life. But this is my home. These are my people. That matters to me." Kade thought about that for a long time. He had spent so many years running from the idea of home, equating it with the poverty and desperation of his childhood. But sitting here with Penelope, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire, he started to understand that home could be something different, something chosen. "I found the gold right here," he said, gesturing to the creek. "That morning before the raid, I held it in my hand and thought my whole life was about to change. And did it? Yes, but not in the way I expected." She looked at him with those clear eyes, and he saw understanding there and something deeper, something that made his pulse quicken. "What will you do with it? The gold?" "I have been thinking about that. I could go anywhere, do anything. But all I keep thinking about is what it would be like to stay, to build something real, something lasting. Maybe buy some land, start that horse ranch I have always talked about. Here, in Custer, maybe, if I had a reason to stay." Penelope smiled, and it was like watching flowers bloom. "You might find one, if you look hard enough." Their courtship continued through summer and into fall. Kade used some of his gold to purchase a stretch of land east of town, good grazing country with a natural spring and stands of cottonwood trees. He began building a house there, nothing fancy but solid and well made, with large windows to let in light and a porch where someone could sit and watch the sunset. He did not tell Penelope it was for her, but he thought about her with every nail he drove, every board he planed smooth. Marcus noticed, of course. One afternoon he rode out to the property and watched Kade work for a while before speaking. "You are serious about my daughter?" It was not a question, but Kade answered anyway. "Yes, sir, very serious. She cares for you too. I can see it in how she talks about you, how she lights up when you come around." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Her mother and I, we had something special. Real love, the kind that lasts. That is what I want for Penelope. Not just security or comfort, but real partnership, real joy." "That is what I want too," Kade said quietly. "I never thought I would find it, but she makes me believe it is possible." "Then you have my blessing. Whenever you are ready to ask her, you have my blessing." Kade asked her on a crisp October evening, when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. He brought her to the house, which was finally finished, and led her through the rooms while she exclaimed over the craftsmanship and details. "You built this all yourself, mostly. Jacob and Thomas helped with the roof. Your father contributed some lumber. It is beautiful, Kade. Whoever you built it for is very lucky." He took both her hands in his, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy. "I built it for you. For us, if you will have me. Penelope, I know I am just a prospector, and I have spent most of my life drifting, but you make me want to be better. You make me want to stay and build something real. I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw you tied up in that camp, refusing to break. Will you marry me?" Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, and when she spoke, her voice was sure. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with equal fervor. And Kade thought about the gold still in his saddlebags, the fortune that had seemed so important that morning by the creek. He would trade it all, every ounce and nugget for this moment, for this woman, for the life they were going to build together. They were married in November in the small church at the center of Custer, with the whole town in attendance. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that had somehow survived the early frosts. Kade wore his best suit, purchased new for the occasion, and when he saw her walking down the aisle on her father's arm, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows in front of God and the community, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed his bride with joy and relief and hope for everything ahead. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. Marcus gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about his daughter's courage and kindness, and how grateful he was that she had found someone worthy of her love. Jacob and Thomas told exaggerated stories about the rescue mission, making it sound much more heroic than it had felt at the time. And through it all, Kade and Penelope danced and smiled and held each other close, lost in their own happiness. When they finally left for their new home, riding together on copper with the moon lighting their way, Kade felt a contentment he had never known was possible. This was what he had been searching for all along. Not gold or freedom or the next opportunity, but this sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be with exactly the right person. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle exploration. Penelope was nervous, as was natural, but Kade was patient, showing her with touch and kiss how much he cherished her. They made love slowly, learning each other's rhythms and responses, and afterward lay tangled together in the big bed he had built, talking quietly until sleep claimed them. The first winter of their marriage was hard in the way first years always are, learning to navigate each other's habits and moods, finding compromise. Kade was used to solitude and sometimes needed space, while Penelope was used to constant activity and sometimes needed company. But they worked through it with patience and communication, and by the time spring arrived, they had found their rhythm. Kade continued working his claim, but only part-time now. The rest of his energy went into building up the horse ranch, purchasing breeding stock and constructing corrals and a barn. Penelope helped her father in the rebuilt general store most days, but she also started a small school in their home, teaching reading and arithmetic to children whose families could not afford formal education. They were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that made their neighbors smile and shake their heads. Young love, some called it, but others recognized it for what it truly was, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. In their second year of marriage, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. Kade came home from working the claim to find her sitting on the porch steps, her face glowing with joy and nervousness. "I have news," she said as he dismounted. Something in her tone made his heart skip. "Good news." "I think so. I hope so. We are going to have a baby." Kade stood frozen for a moment, the words not quite computing. Then suddenly he was moving, gathering her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed and told him to be careful. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" "Happy." "Penelope, I am over the moon. I am terrified and thrilled, and I cannot believe how lucky I am." She cupped his face in her hands, her eyes shining. "We are lucky, both of us. This child will be so loved." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and summer. Penelope remained active, insisting she felt fine, though Kade worried constantly and tried to convince her to rest more. Marcus was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandfather and helped Kade build a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanded until it was soft as silk. Their son was born on a warm September evening, arriving quickly and with minimal fuss, as if he was eager to meet the world. Kade held Penelope's hand through it all, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth and whispering encouragement. And when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, he felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered, staring down at the tiny face, the miniature fingers that wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "He has your eyes," Penelope said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, arguing good-naturedly over various options. But now, holding his son, only one name felt right. "James, after my grandfather. He was the only person in my family who believed I could be something more. James Emerson, I like it. Hello, James." Welcome to the world. Parenthood transformed them both in unexpected ways. Kade discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor at midnight with a colicky baby, singing soft songs in his rough voice, until James finally settled. Penelope bloomed with motherhood, finding joy in every milestone and mundane moment. Marcus was a devoted grandfather, visiting often to hold his grandson and tell stories about Penelope's childhood. The ranch continued to grow, gaining a reputation for quality horses. Kade had an eye for good stock and a gentle way with training, and soon buyers were coming from as far as Wyoming and Nebraska to purchase his animals. The gold claim played out eventually, as such things always do, but by then, it did not matter. They had built something sustainable, something that would provide for them and their family for years to come. When James was 2 years old, toddling around the ranch on sturdy legs and chattering in his own invented language, Penelope became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she spent the last months confined to bed rest on the doctor's orders. Kade was beside himself with worry, but Penelope remained calm, insisting everything would be fine. Their daughter was born in April, smaller than James had been but fierce, with a cry that could wake the dead. They named her Rose after Penelope's mother, and from the moment she entered the world, she had everyone wrapped around her tiny finger. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and Kade often found himself supervising the 2-year-old as he carefully held the bottle or fetched clean cloths. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Rose was wild and adventurous, always climbing things she should not and asking questions nobody could answer. Kade and Penelope raised them with love and discipline, teaching them to work hard and treat others with kindness, to value honesty and keep their word. The town of Custer continued to grow and prosper. The railroad reached them in 1890, connecting them more firmly to the outside world. Marcus eventually retired from running the store, turning it over to a younger man while he spent his time doting on his grandchildren. Jacob married a widow from Deadwood and settled down to farm. Thomas went to try his luck in the Klondike Gold Rush and was never heard from again, though they hoped he had found what he was looking for. On their 10th anniversary, Kade took Penelope back to the creek where he had found the gold. It was summer, and the water ran clear and cold over the smooth stones. They sat on the bank, hand in hand, watching their children play in the shallows. "You ever regret it?" Kade asked quietly. "Marrying a drifter instead of someone more established?" Penelope looked at him with surprise. "Regret? Kade, you gave me everything I ever wanted. A home built with love, children who are healthy and happy, a partnership that makes every day better. Why would I regret any of that? I just remember that morning, holding that gold and thinking my life was about to change. And I was right, but not in any way I could have predicted. I thought the gold was the answer to all my problems. What changed your mind? You. The moment I saw you in that raider camp, I knew there were things more valuable than gold, and every day since has proven me right. I meant what I said in my proposal. I would trade it all for you. The gold, the ranch, everything. You are what makes my life worth living. Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. Good thing you do not have to trade it. You get to keep me and everything we have built together. James called out then, having found an interesting rock, and Rose splashed water at her brother in retaliation for some imagined slight. Kade and Penelope laughed and went to referee, and life continued in all its messy, beautiful glory. When James turned 18, he took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing the same skill and intuition with horses that Kade possessed. Rose, at 16, was courting a young man from a neighboring ranch, a good kid who treated her with respect and worked hard. Kade watched his children becoming adults and felt the bittersweet pride that all parents experience, wanting them to stay small forever, but also wanting them to find their own paths. Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, surrounded by family. They buried him next to his wife in the Custer Cemetery, and the whole town turned out to pay respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community. At the reception afterward, person after person told stories about Marcus's kindness and generosity, how he had helped them through hard times and celebrated their victories. Kade and Penelope held each other and grieved, but also celebrated a life well lived. As they entered their later years, Kade and Penelope settled into a comfortable rhythm. They were grandparents now, James having married a smart young woman from Rapid City and given them 3 grandchildren, while Rose and her husband had 2 boys who were hellions in the best possible way. The ranch was prosperous and established, known throughout the region. The house they had built together had weathered storms and seasons, growing more solid with time. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch that Kade had envisioned all those years ago, watching the sun set over the prairie and the black hills in the distance. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories or making plans. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, needing no words to communicate what they felt. You know what I remember most clearly? Penelope asked one evening, her hair now silver but her eyes as clear as ever. The moment you took your hand away from my mouth in that camp and I saw your face, I remember thinking, this man will save me. And you did. But not just from the raiders. You saved me from a life half lived, from safety that felt like suffocation. You gave me adventure and partnership and love deeper than I knew was possible. Kade kissed her temple, feeling the familiar rush of affection and gratitude. You saved me too, from loneliness and aimless wandering. You gave me purpose and home, and a reason to believe I could be more than just a lucky prospector. We saved each other then. I suppose we did. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by family and friends in the same church where they had been married. The building had been expanded and updated, but the essence remained the same. Their children and grandchildren sang songs and gave toasts, and Kade looked around at all these people connected to him by blood and love. This community that had grown from one man's decision to risk everything for a woman he barely knew, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the path his life had taken. That night, alone in their bedroom, Penelope showed him a wooden box she had kept hidden all these years. Inside was a single gold nugget, the largest one from his original find. I asked your permission to keep one, she explained, after we were married. You were so focused on selling it all and investing in the ranch that I wanted to preserve something, a reminder of where it all started." Kade held the nugget up to the lamplight, watching it gleam. "I had forgotten how bright it was, how much promise it seemed to hold." "It kept its promise, did it not? Everything you hoped for when you found it that morning came true, just not in the way you expected." "Better than I expected, so much better." As they grew older, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant, they spent increasing amounts of time simply being together. Kade taught his grandsons to work with horses, passing on knowledge and technique accumulated over decades. Penelope read to her granddaughters and taught them to bake bread and stand up for themselves. They attended community events and church services, helped neighbors in need, and watched the new century arrive with wonder at how much the world had changed. Kade developed a cough in his 73rd winter that would not go away. The doctor said it was pneumonia, common in the elderly, and that he should rest and stay warm. Penelope nursed him with fierce determination, just as he had cared for her during difficult pregnancies and illnesses over the years. For a while it seemed like he might recover, but then the cough worsened and his breathing became labored. On a cold February morning, with snow falling gently outside and his wife holding his hand, Kade Emerson passed peacefully from this life. His last words were simple: "Thank you for everything. I love you." The funeral was large, attended by what seemed like half the county. People spoke about his integrity and skill, his generosity and quiet kindness. But Penelope knew the eulogies, while heartfelt, could not capture the fullness of the man she had loved. He had been her partner in every sense, the person who made her laugh and challenged her to grow, who held her when she cried and celebrated her victories. He had been her home. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, tending the garden she and Kade had planted together, telling stories about him to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry his legacy forward. And when her time came, on a warm summer evening with the windows open and the scent of roses drifting in, she went peacefully, a smile on her face, perhaps seeing someone waiting for her on the other side. They buried her next to Kade in the Custer Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read simply, "Kade and Penelope Emerson, together forever." The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same care and integrity his father had shown. Rose and her family remained nearby, part of the community fabric. The gold nugget Penelope had saved was passed down through generations, along with the story of the cowboy Prospector who found a fortune in the creek bed, but learned that true wealth was measured in love and family, and lives well lived together. Years later, when tourists would come through Custer and ask about the history of the area, locals would sometimes tell the story of Kade Emerson, the prospector who struck it rich and used his fortune to build one of the most successful horse ranches in the region. But those who had known him personally told a different story. They talked about a man who risked his life to save a woman he barely knew, who built a home with his own hands as a declaration of love, who found his greatest treasure not in gold, but in the partnership he forged with a remarkable woman. He found gold in the creek bed that morning, old-timers would say, shaking their heads with fond remembrance. But he always said he would trade it all for her, and you know what? I believe he meant it. The creek still runs where Kade first found his fortune, its waters cold and clear, occasionally glinting with fool's gold that tricks hopeful prospectors. But no one has ever found a strike like his, and perhaps they never will, because the real gold was never in the creek bed at all. It was in the life that followed, in the love that sustained through decades and hardship and joy, in the family that grew from one man's choice to value a woman's life over his own safety. to build something lasting instead of chasing the next opportunity. The house still stands too, maintained by descendants who understand its significance. Visitors can see the careful joinery, the large windows that let in light, the porch where two people sat through countless evenings and watched the sun set over land they loved. If you stand there quietly, you can almost hear their voices, the low rumble of his laughter mixing with her lighter tones, conversations about children and crops and dreams for the future. In the church in Custer, now over a century old, there is a small plaque commemorating couples who celebrated 50 or more years of marriage. Kade and Penelope Emerson's names are engraved there, along with dozens of others, a testament to enduring love in a hard land. But their story is the one people remember, the one that gets retold at weddings and anniversaries as an example of what marriage can be when two people truly commit to each other. The Badlands where Penelope was held captive have not changed much, still wild and beautiful and slightly dangerous. Sometimes hikers find old campsites and artifacts from the 1880s, rusted bullets and broken bottles, remnants of a rougher time. The Dalton gang was eventually caught and hanged for their crimes, though that happened years after they took Penelope and long after Kade and his companions rescued her. Justice, when it came, was final and absolute. The legacy of Kade and Penelope Emerson extends beyond their immediate family. The school Penelope started grew into a formal institution, providing education to children throughout the region. The ranch James inherited has been in continuous operation for over 100 years, still known for quality horses and ethical treatment of animals. The general store Marcus built, and that helped fund Penelope's dowry, has changed hands many times but still serves the community, a constant in a changing world. But perhaps their greatest legacy is the example they set for how to live a life of purpose and meaning. In an era defined by individual ambition and westward expansion, they chose partnership and community. In a time when marriage was often transactional, they built something based on genuine love and mutual respect. They showed that it was possible to be both practical and romantic, to work hard and still make time for joy, to face hardship without losing hope or humor. Their great-great-grandchildren still live in the area, carrying forward the values and stories passed down through generations. They know the tale of how Kade found gold but chose love, how Penelope was rescued and became a rescuer in her own right, teaching and supporting others. They understand that family history is not just names and dates, but the accumulation of choices, the small daily decisions to be kind and honest and brave that create a legacy worth preserving. On the anniversary of their wedding, family members gather at the cemetery, bringing flowers and sharing memories. The youngest children listen with wide eyes as their elders tell the story once again. How a cowboy prospector found a fortune in a creek bed, and then found something even more valuable in the eyes of a woman who needed rescuing. How he said he would trade it all for her, and how his entire life proved that declaration true. The gold is gone now, spent on building a life and a legacy. The house still stands, the land still produces, but more importantly, the love story continues to inspire. Young couples facing their own challenges take comfort in knowing that Kade and Penelope faced worse and persevered. Parents struggling to balance work and family remember how two people built something lasting through commitment and compromise. Anyone who has ever loved deeply and truly can see themselves in the story of a man and woman who chose each other every day for 4 decades. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the gold, though it provided opportunity. Not the rescue, though it brought them together. Not even the ranch or the children or the grandchildren. though all those things were cherished. What mattered was the choice they made, again and again, to love each other well, to build a life together that honored both their dreams and their shared reality, to face whatever came with courage and humor, and an unshakable belief that together they could weather any storm. The story of Kade and Penelope Emerson is a Western romance in the truest sense, full of danger and heroism and hard-won happiness. But it is also something more universal, a reminder that the best treasures in life cannot be panned from a creek bed or purchased with gold. They must be earned through loyalty and sacrifice, nurtured through patience and forgiveness, and protected through unwavering commitment. Love, real love, is the work of a lifetime, and Kade and Penelope understood that from the beginning. So when visitors ask about the history of Custer, South Dakota, they hear about the gold rush and the famous trials and the development of the frontier. But if they talk to the right people, if they find someone who knows the local legends, they will hear about a cowboy prospector who found gold in a creek bed one morning, and then found something infinitely more precious in the days that followed. They will hear about a woman who faced terror with courage, and then chose to build a life with the man who saved her. And they will understand that some stories endure not because they are extraordinary, but because they capture something essential about what it means to be human, to love and be loved, to build something lasting in a transient world. That is the legacy of Kade and Penelope Emerson, written not in gold or stone but in the lives they touched and the love they shared. And in a very real sense, their story never ends because it continues to inspire each new generation to seek their own treasures, to value people over possessions, and to remember that the richest life is one lived in partnership with someone who makes every day, every challenge, every triumph sweeter simply by being there. The creek still flows, the sun still sets over the prairie, and somewhere, in the collective memory of a community and a family, two people dance at their wedding while the whole town celebrates. Two people sit on a porch holding hands as they watch their grandchildren play. Two people choose each other one more time, knowing that this choice, more than any other, is what gives their life meaning and purpose and joy that endures long after gold turns to dust and memory becomes legend.